My presentation today is a little bit, if you will, technical or focuses on the political economy of India. I know that all of you are looking at leadership roles in whatever spheres in life. I think it's important that all of you have the right first principles. That's a personal obsession of mine is, go back to the first principle. What's the first question you're asking? I hope to shed some light and hopefully you can pick up on some of these first principles or at least start to ask the right questions as far as a country like India goes. That being said, this is not a technical presentation. I'm not overwhelming you with data and numbers and graphs and things. What I am trying to do is tell a story. And the story is inclusive growth. We've heard this term bandied about for the last 5 years. Everybody, Arvind Panagriya is talking about it. The Prime Minister mentions it. The President mentions it. And clearly something is not right. You always hear about the inequity in India. You hear about how the rich are doing very well, the poor not so much, right? So what's going on here? What is the problem and how do we get everybody to grow? How do we solve this big overarching question of poverty and inequality, inequity? So why is India poor?
I would say it's the lack of implementation. We have certain policies and laws that can help India get less poor, but it's the lack of implementation of those.
Give me an example.
Like we have NREGA, but it is not implemented properly, and we need to make certain changes to certain redundant policies and laws that still exist in metropolitan cities like Delhi and Bombay.
So you would wager that if NREGA was implemented right, we would solve poverty in this country?
Not completely.
So then ask yourself, why not?
Well, I agree with the population explosion, but specifically population explosion among the lesser privileged people, and secondly,
so you're saying the poor are a problem. So let's get rid of them.
No, there's a population explosion among the poor.
Correct. Why?
And because there's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of culture. That's the culture, right? There's a lack of understanding that having many.
So right. So the poor are not very bright. Let's get rid of them. So let's do forced nasbandi.
Let's make them
close it up.
Let's make them brighter and let's bring them up.
So you're saying the poor are not very bright?
No, I'm not saying the poor are not very bright.
You are exactly saying the poor are not very bright.
So they have the potential to be bright.
So they're not very bright right now. You're digging yourself in. So just hold that thought. All right, I'm not going to take too many more responses, but I'll give one more chance to this.
Thank you. I think India actually has a lot of money. There's just not enough of it reaching the right people.
Why?
I don't know, because so many reasons. So I think a lot of people who have the money aren't exactly making the effort to make sure it reaches the right people. There's enough of a feedback.
So there's a fixed pot of money. So only if I give you my money, will you have money?
No, I mean, there's also ways to generate money, but there aren't enough incentives for people to do that. And
do you need an incentive to raise money?
Well, no, but you also need a certain amount of investment. There isn't enough of an entrepreneurial culture.
So you're saying that without an investment of gold, you couldn't make money?
Well, you need some to start with, but it doesn't have to be a vast amount.
What is that something that you need to start with?
You also need a basic education and you need ideas. Well, it can help.
Okay, so what I want, again, to leave back from this is we are propounding so many theories. It's all some big issue. But I don't think we have the right answer, and I'm going to show you why. The story is that China and India, which have fairly dense populations, India is of course 337, very, very dense, have very, very low per capita incomes. But then you have other countries which are also as densely populated. Two examples right in our backyard, Hong Kong and China, Hong Kong and Singapore. Magic. Two of the most densely populated places in the world with the highest per capita incomes. Something's different, right? So why are their people not sort of stupid, productive, educated, investing, earning? Why are they doing that? Then there are sparsely populated countries, countries where there's square miles. Of course, somebody's going to raise their hand and say UAE has oil, blah, blah, blah. Indicative, yes, we know that, but there's a story here. USA isn't that populated, is not that densely populated. Canada isn't, Australia isn't, okay? But then you have others. Similarly, the whole African continent is an example, fairly sparsely populated, but per capita incomes are very low. Something's different. So what did these two countries with very, very opposite sets of populations do right? And what did these not? Our own example, we are so fond of saying Kerala, 90% growth, 90% literacy. Well, Kerala's per capita income compared to the rest of the country is not that great. Kerala has never been a shining example of economic growth in this country. What has been a shining example is Punjab, Haryana. They're not very smart. I'm sorry, no offense intended. They're not very educated, but they're doing something else. I'm sorry, I take that back. They're not very educated, but they're doing something different. What are they doing differently? Keralites, by the way, go abroad and become amazing entrepreneurs. Dubai is full of them, and not just laborers. They're doing fantastically well in the restaurant business. They're doing brilliantly well in the transport business. In business, as entrepreneurs who started with one fleet car and then grew. Started with one little deli somewhere in Dubai and then became restaurant owners.
Government in Punjab gave them an incentive to stay back in India and you know.
The question is not about whether the government gave them an incentive to stay back. Punjabis go abroad. Canada's full of them. It's true.
I feel like there are certain economic and political events which take place which shape how like the state comes out to be. For instance, you had the Green Revolution in Punjab, which did not really take off so well in Kerala. So you have these, you know.
So how would you explain Gujaratis? There was no Green Revolution in Gujarat.
So I'm not saying that, you know, like you said, like it's not like Green Revolution is the cause for, you know, investment. But what I'm saying, like there are these drives for like research and development and coming up with new ideas, and if that takes place in a particular state, then you have results like you have in Punjab. In Gujarat, you have
Punjab's income didn't just grow in this period. Punjab has historically had high incomes. Punjab has historically had very, very high investment. Let's rest there for a second, okay? Let's try to debunk something else. Julian Simon, who by the way is brilliant, you should read him if you get a chance, The Population Myth and other such, and he argues that if that was the case, then the prices of everything we know should have been going up, not down, right? They're telling you what is abundant and what is scarce, right? So when the price is high, you know that relative to the number of people wanting that good, it is scarce, right? So they're showing you a relative state of scarcity or abundance, okay? So generally speaking, when the price of oil, for example, oil, artificial scarcity right now as imposed, I'm not saying for 10 years for life, I'm saying for this moment, an imposed scarcity has raised prices, correct? Okay. Similarly, we know that cell phone prices are crashing because suddenly they're abundant. They've got 1,000 manufacturers coming up with new cell phones, okay? So that's what a price does. So Julian Simon wagered Paul Ulrich that your theory is nonsense, that we are not running out of resources. What's happening, yes, I'm not arguing as to the larger state of resource crunch and all of it. I'm saying very simply, at a point in time, that human beings are not constrained by resources. What does that mean? So, well, I'll tell you the bet first. So what he did was he said, let's look at the 5 elements, metals, that are being most used today. Okay, so he took copper, tungsten, chrome, nickel, and tin. He said, let's keep a basket of these goods common to the CPI. Do you guys know what the consumer price index is? So similar to that, right? So put these in a basket, and we will come up with a collective basket cost, or the basket price, right? And if this basket price rises in a span of 10 years, then I lose. We know this has become scarce. If the price or the value of that basket falls, I win, because suddenly there is more of that to go around, okay? There is a bigger story, and I know we can argue a lot of things about it, but I'm just saying there's a very simple thing to take away from it. Well, it turns out that the basket value halved, more than halved in the span. Same goods, same metals in the pot, okay? So, of course, Ulrich sent the difference. The bet was that whatever the difference is, the other person would, one, lose his reputation as an economist, but also end up reimbursing the other, okay? So Paul Ulrich sent Julian Simon a check for $577, which was fascinating, right? So are we running out of resources? Now, resources are a very, very interesting thing. You could argue that since then, all of these things have become scarce. But what else has happened? In that time, you've had another 7 new things invented. New materials, new alloys, new sort of substitutes that came up. Not because some government was directing you to do it, or because there was some calamitous situation, but because the market anticipated it. And something happened, right? the genius of somebody, what somebody called enterprise. Okay, poor culture and bad attitudes. Well, is that really right? Are we that fatalistic? Well, Indians in India do terribly. Indians abroad do really, really well. Again, you see the same inequity here in India. Some Indians are doing fantastically well for themselves. Some Indians, not so much. Right? So what is holding back those Indians that are not doing as well? There were a larger number of us back in the 80s and the 90s. Now there are fewer, not fewer, but certainly more of us that are doing better than before. Shale is an amazing example. The world is not clamoring after oil now because suddenly they found shale. And I guarantee you in the next 10, 15 years, and you're right, it's not that we will not run out of these things. We will run out of these things because imaginably there is just finite. I don't think we should worry about that. Because why we shouldn't worry about that is because as typical of the market, when the price of something rises through the roof, somebody is going to come up with a substitute, right? And that's what we're asking. So we're not constrained by a fixed pool of resources. We're constrained by imagination, by enterprise. And why are those two things sort of constrained is the question to ask, okay? So then of course some people will say, if you look at the population chart that I showed you, a lot of the countries that weren't doing so well were bad bearers of a colonial legacy, right? Africa is a classic example. India is a good example. Years and years and years. Well, there were others too. Okay, so here we can look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong, a colony for many, many years. Well, today its per capita income exceeds its colonizer. How did that happen? You know, what was right there? All of these countries, Asian tigers are a classic example. All Asian tigers at some point or the other were colonized, and not by the good colonizer. England was the happy colonizer, right? Compared to France, compared to Spain, compared to the Netherlands, the Belgians, who were all pretty horrible to their colonies. But some countries managed to get past it. Okay? And of course, there must be the question of, you know, perpetually half the times I hear, we should just become a dictatorship and our implementation problems are solved. We just stop messing around, right? Well, it's been tried. It's not as if it hasn't been tried. In some places it's worked. In some places it hasn't worked. Now, Singapore is a very interesting example. It's got a dictatorship. It was a colony. It has the same kind of people as we do. It has a lot of people, yet its per capita income is through the roof, right? Then there are other democracies. You take USA, which is on the other side of the spectrum. Very few people. Well, the oldest democracy in the world, in a sense, right? Yet, per capita incomes through the roof. Okay, so then let's come back to that moot question, which is, why is India poor, or why are a majority of Indians poor? Right? I'm using the term majority because I know there's a middle class overlap, but by world standards, the middle class of India isn't that rich, isn't that wealthy. There is still a long way to go, right? Okay, so in 1991, I know most of you are probably post-90s children, which really depresses me. How many of you grew up in the 90s, were born post-91? Oh my goodness. So you guys have no idea. So I'll tell you, when I was growing up, and I'm at least, you know, an 80s child. Let me state, not that much older than you. No, I'm kidding. But when I was growing up, if you wanted a telephone line in India, you had to wait for months, years before that, right? In the 80s at least it was months, in the 70s and the 60s it was years. You needed an ambassador car, if you needed a Fiat, if you needed a scooter, Bajaj scooters. So what was going on there? Well, in 91, it changed. You guys have no idea about the questions of scarcity, the way it was then. I'm not saying that, you know, destitution doesn't exist now, but at least for this group that I see, you're either middle class or upper middle class. You have, this world is a very, very different world than what was there pre-91, and it was like this. It was like this, I can't even tell you. Because overnight, the first sign of a country changing was in 90, we got private television. Overnight, things changed. Today, we don't even question having 150 channels. Of course, of garbage, but 150 channels, no less, right? How did that come about? So in 91, we did something. Under pressure, with knife to our throat, we said, we don't have a choice. If we've got to, do you guys know what happened in 91? Oh, thank God. Okay, so our forex reserves dipped. We had to do something. The only people willing to give us the money to bail us out was the IMF. Yes, they're evil but for a different set of reasons, I'm guessing, than what you all are going to say. But, and we did, we liberalized key sectors in the country, yeah? But the poorest have continued to stay poor. The gap is widening, our Gini coefficient isn't that great, we're not taking care of our poor, which is what is leading to things like Narega, several other welfare schemes now, now hopefully not food security, but several welfare schemes like that, right? So where is the trickle down? This was a grand promise of liberalization, that you open the market and as the rich get wealthier, the money will trickle down. Well, money hasn't trickled down to the poorest. Why hasn't it trickled down? So like I said, pre that, the general philosophy of the government, this is a Nehruvian philosophy, was that government had to be at the commanding heights of any economy, right? So all of the important things that were going to be manufactured, from shoes all the way till heavy electricals and the first supercomputer in the country, were going to be done by the government, right? Each and every one of them was a failure, without exception. Trade liberalization changed something. The first thing it changed was removal of industrial license. What was typically in the 90s was, the 70s and the 80s was called as a license permit quota raj, right? So either you needed a license, or you would get stuck at some babu's office window for a permit, or worse of all, you couldn't be an entrant in the market because, hey, we've got a quota on the number of shoes we need in this country. As if that's even possible, right? And partial convertibility of the rupee, which added a lot of leverage to our currency, if you will. But another big thing that happened, we lowered our tariffs. We opened up our borders. We said we shouldn't worry about things coming in from abroad because they're going to help us. We want cheap cell phones. We want, well, at the time, the needs were very different. Very simply, refrigerators, electronic goods. Not just that. You had ridiculous import licenses on machinery that you needed to manufacture in India for Indians, which made no sense. But some bright guy somewhere was thinking, that's really smart. Okay, cellular subscribers. All of you, I imagine, have cell phones. Airline passenger traffic. Well, Kingfisher is no longer very good now, but essentially, again, has generally speaking, the first time I took a flight was 1998, right? And most people that I went to school with hadn't taken a flight before that. It was just interesting because suddenly it was available. It wasn't hard to get tickets. It wasn't through the roof. Delhi, Bombay at the time used to cost almost 17,000 rupees. It was absurd. It made no sense. And then there are other things that are happening. We're suddenly the neo-colonizers. Then you have farmer suicides. You have the tribal LWA problem in India, the left-wing areas, the Maoist issue, right? Our internal security threat from our own people. So Jeffrey Sachs, how many of you know Jeffrey Sachs? Okay. Jeffrey Sachs is a fairly learned guy, and he's an economist of some repute. Well, he's a development specialist of some repute. And he tried to explain the issue. And he said, the evidence showed clearly that India's economic growth was urban-led, with gaps in living standards between cities and the countrysides widening in recent years. Okay? So what would the natural solution be? Well, people in the rural areas are not employed. Let's get a Narega going. Come back to first principles. Why are people in rural areas poor? Who's asking that question? Why are people in cities rich? Why did Sheila Dikshit yesterday cry about the mass immigration into Delhi now? Why do people move? Why are they going to other places? Why are they doing better in cities? Relatively, I know they live in squalor, but within 2 generations managed to change. Why do they leave India and go somewhere else? Working as in horrible lifestyles as taxi drivers in Canada or in the restaurant business in London.
I think maybe value for labor, that could be...
What does that mean, value for labor?
Like, if you go outside, even a small job, like a plumber or something is valued. But something like that in India is not valued, like handwork, craft work, that isn't valued as such.
So, what is the question to ask?
So, how can we create or appreciate the value?
What is the question to ask? Why is there no value? Why is there no appreciation? Why doesn't a plumber in India do it? Somebody else?
I guess
sorry, just one more.
greater supply of labor than demand in a way.
So now you're saying that we have too few people.
No, in those
Too much,
countries.
yeah, there are too many people as relative to jobs.
So you tell me, postulate. So when you're saying there are too few people for a job, essentially.
Too many people for,
too many people for a job. You're assuming that that's the only opportunity, that's the only job.
Enough opportunities haven't been created.
Why? Let's rephrase what Sachs said. Sachs said urban led, rural left behind. Well, we're going to say the liberalized sector ahead. Look, everywhere you look, who are the Indians that are doing well? Those who are employed in industry, or those who got the sort of feeder of those working in the industry. So plumbers in cities are doing much better than plumbers elsewhere. Farmers who are closer to an urban or a peri-urban space are doing much better, right? Or for that matter, any other service sector, the movement, the ability to migrate, the chance to be able to try in a city closer to an liberalized base does better. So if you rephrase the paradox, you suddenly say liberalized sectors did really well, unliberalized sectors not so much. Which are the unliberalized sectors in the country? The unorganized sector, so those who don't have any access to formal industry, for example, the agriculture sector, which has its own set of problems, and the third sector, which is somewhere in the periphery, that of forests and tribals. That completely ignored, put away basket of people in India. Let's look at some of the interesting laws. I'm going to completely change track. Okay? Now we're going to go into the books and try and open and ask some fundamental questions. So here, the cycle rickshaw bylaw of the Delhi Municipal Corporation Act of 1960, section 3 says, no person shall keep or ply for hire a cycle rickshaw in Delhi unless he himself is the owner. No person will be granted more than one such license. Well, how many of you have families that have more than one cars? Go on, don't be ashamed. So I'm going to put a rule in the books tomorrow that says no family can own more than one car. This is exactly what we had on the books in the 1950s and the 1960s. Is that fair? Is that right? That outrages me that you would consider doing that to a poor person. And I know somebody somewhere had some good intention, because there is the question of contractors and there is takedars who may exploit. But the question to ask is, you have deprived this poor guy who may be a good contractor someday from the option. He may have somebody in his family who can ply an auto for him. Okay, let's look at another such smart one. Any cycle rickshaw found plying for hire without a license or found driven by a person not having a proper license as provided under bylaw 3.1, this is under Delhi Municipal Corporation section 17A, bylaws 3.1, 3.2. Okay, so just think of how much paper somebody wasted in thinking of this garbage up. Shall be liable to be seized by the commissioner or a person duly authorized by him or in his behalf. You are only allowed to apply for one license for one cycle rickshaw. Not just that, we will cap the number of licenses we provide. That license number hasn't changed since the 1980s. Absurd. And nobody is talking about this stuff, you guys, nobody. So if you're going to talk about poverty in the right way. Let's not pity them, they don't need our pity, they're entrepreneurs, they're smart guys, they're not stupid. They're hardworking, their blood, sweat and tears goes into this, but we won't let them. Okay, very, very interesting. This is my favorite. And this is there across the country. I'll show you Delhi and I'll show you Bombay. It turns out there's a law that says, you've seen these refrigerated water carts, right? Well, each of them has to be at least 50 or 100 meters away from each other. Do we say that about a kirana shop? Do we say that about houses? Do we say that about, we used to say that about schools, but that's a different story. Do we say that about anything else in the world? Does it make sense? Is there such a thing as too many refrigerated water tanks? Shocking. We have it on the books. Then there is something else very interesting. This is fascinatingly badly worded. It is just so awesome, it blows your mind. The hawkers, should not hawk within 100 meters from any place of worship, holy shrine, educational institution, general hospital, and within the periphery of 150 meters from any municipal or other market. What? Wait, what? Did you get that? So I want to be part of the market, but I can't vend near a market. Think about it. Think about what we have done to alleviate the real problem of the poorest of the poor. Zip. So they don't need Narega. They don't. Because the first question is, I would say, if you had a completely open economy for these guys and they were still doing badly, then yes, then let's think of welfare. Welfare is a recourse. It is not a prerequisite. Human beings didn't come from welfare. We came up with welfare to help each other, not, as a first step. Okay? Similarly, what happens with farmers? Do you know why agriculture is the most protected sector in this country and farmers are the most downtrodden? People talk about, GMO and farmers committing suicides and BT cotton crops failing. The question to ask is why? The government forced these farmers to cultivate what they knew inherently was bad crops. It colluded with Monsanto, it colluded with a lot of these guys and forced these kinds of crops down their throats. In an area that was arid, that didn't have any water, for a very, very water intensive crop. Stupid. Blows the mind, right? But that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is even today, there is a ridiculous method. I'll give you an analogy. Cell phones are the best analogy in this country. Okay? Not the Spectrum, let's not go into Spectrum, but there's an answer for Spectrum. But just the cell phone instrument. Okay? Now imagine if all of you, in order to buy your cell phone, you're a cell phone manufacturer, you're a cell phone manufacturer. The only people that you can sell the cell phones to is me, the government. You all, then I allocate these cell phones among you, as I please. Or, based on certain bylaws and triple bylaws that I've written out. Does that make any sense? It makes no sense. What does the produced manufacturer do? He manufactures, gives it to a distributor. The distributor figures out how to get it to a consumer. The government cannot do that. But we do that in agriculture. Even today you have price controls. The government says no more than so much. Or that we will pay a farmer at least this much. That's like saying, I am definitely for a cell phone going to make sure that you earn 8,000 rupees. No matter how rubbish your cell phone is, no matter how good your cell phone is, both of those would cost exactly the same. That makes no sense. There's no incentive. Of course, Apple wouldn't come up, right? We do that in agriculture. Every single day we do that in agriculture because the only way to sell, for a farmer to sell from the farm gate, is for him to go to an AP, to a mandi, sell it in the mandi then figures out what to do with it. The same thing, they've got to send it to the PDS system, sort of that way of doing it.
Just a question.
Yes.
Here you're criticizing the subsidy and the price mechanism that we have.
Yeah.
But if we go in for a complete free market where there are no boundaries at all, don't you think it will be a very hard risk for these people to take?
Why do you think that they need to be protected? What makes them less able to survive this? Is it intellect? Is it hard work?
It's not about the intellect or
Then what is it about?
But the basic resources that they have to fall back on.
They have their land. So let me not even argue. Yes, I am an unabashed market supporter. Unabashed. But I'm not arguing for that right now. I'm not even making that argument. All I'm saying is that this is stupid. This isn't even, I'm not even saying minimum price support. I'm not even saying touch the minimum price support. All I'm saying is if a farmer wants to sell it to the market, he should bloody well be free to do it. Right? It's not, so if a farmer chooses that I want to go to a mandi and only sell it in a mandi and get a minimum support price for it, he should be free to do it. Okay, I will give you that postulate. But I will not give you the postulate that he has to only sell it to them. I guarantee you that the mandis will be run dry in 2 years within that happening. They won't go there because they don't get good prices. Not just do they not get good prices there, they don't have the advantage of information because markets do a lot more than just do price, right? Because he's suddenly learning that there is innovation. Acha, iska crop is a little bit different. This basmati grade is different. This is happening, that's happening. New things, cool things, new interesting value chain questions. So those are advantages that he doesn't have from the mandi anymore, right? So yes, I will give you that at least for now, at the very minimum, open it up. Do what we did in the industrial sector for this sector. I will say social ventures are pointless. If the very basic that you need for a human being to be productive, to be entrepreneurial is not there, then no matter how much social welfare, today you do PDS, you do food security, nothing will change. It will get far worse. Food prices will go through the roof. The poor will get poorer. There will be more black marketeering, more wastage. You're just going to keep doubling it. Why should a farmer be forced to sell only to a government mandi? Why? Why should a cycle rickshaw puller be subject to a cap on licenses? Why should a street vendor not be able to earn his livelihood in a productive, honest, fruitful way? So the question I'm asking is, yes, in a glamorous world of absurd top-downism, somebody would have thought that I'm going to magically make all of these fancy shops. Well, that's a disaster. That makes no economic sense. That is not how an entrepreneur grows. An entrepreneur grows from ground up. Even in Hong Kong, Singapore, Southeast Asia, even today, natural markets are recognized. Urban spaces are inclusive. You don't throw street vendors out en masse and confiscate their goods. A lot of them have perishable goods. They die within a day of use, right? So the question to ask is not how pretty we want our cities. The question to ask is, how do you get those pretty cities? Do you get it by, superficially cleaning the filth, so to speak, away? Or do you get it by raising their incomes? So tomorrow they're not street vendors, they're doing something, different. Okay, similarly for tribals and people in the forest, the whole Mao issue. Has anybody read, by the way, it's a highly recommended book. It's by a dear friend. It's called The Absent State. It's by Rahul Pandita. Deals in 3 parts. One with, the bulk of the book deals with the LWA areas in the country. The Red Corridor deals with Kashmir and deals with the northeastern states, but far more in detail with the Mao problem. So the Mao problem, everybody points out, is हमको कुछ दिया नहीं सरकार ने. Well, actually, सरकार ने बहुत गलत चीज़ें दी. सरकार ने आपको बिल्कुल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स नहीं दिए जो आपकी नेचुरल लाइवलीहुड होनी चाहिए. फॉरेस्ट डिपेंडेंट कम्युनिटीज़, फॉर एग्जांपल, a bulk of tribals in India are forest dependent communities, right? Well, it turns out that you can't use the products in the forest in the way that you choose and make any gains with it. You can't. Take maua, for example, right? Goans can make feni, a tribal cannot make maua. Can't sell it. Can't make toddy and sell it. Right? Same thing with BDs. Do you know that there is a regulation as to how many tendu leaves you can legally roll to sell to the government, which acts as an APMC, buys all the BDs, sells it to the, whatever. Ridiculous. So in the Indian Forest Act, which is, by the way, a relic of the 1800s or 1700s, 1800s, what happened was that bamboo has been classified as a tree. Well, biologically that's wrong, but that has huge impact on tribal areas, on the northeast, because bamboo is one of the fastest growing regenerating products. Environmentally, it's fantastic. It's God's gift to us because we wouldn't be deforesting at the rate we are now. But you can't. Because under the Indian Forest Act, if it's a tree, classified as a tree in a forest area, suddenly you have no access to it. Can't cut it, can't sell it, can't manufacture with it, can't do anything with it. The only people who can, those contractors who the government said this is in national interest and made exceptions by doing whatever it is, gave the licenses required and said, chalo bhaiya aap le lo. So who gains? Your BDO gains, the forest official gains. The poor man, that tribal who's living in the vicinity, who has in fact more often than not cared for these trees, cared for this area for centuries, has absolutely zero right over it. And then we cry, our forest dwellers are so poor. Of course they're poor. We've condemned them to a lifetime of poverty. So yes, institutions and policies is the silver bullet, to my mind. And the one policy that we need to focus on, when I say policy, I don't mean particular schemes and ideas, I mean overarching policy, is economic freedom. The freedom to be able to exchange under a rule of, under the gambit of rule of law, under a proper set of, what's the word? A well-articulated and well-reasoned set of regulations, perhaps. The degree of regulation I'm happy to argue about. I believe in very, very little regulation, but I'm happy to indulge in that. But at the very least, allow them that access. Look at what happened with industry. Look at how all of our lives prospered. Don't they have the right for that to happen to them? Shouldn't they have that chance? And yes, if they don't make it, then have your welfare. Help each other in any way that we can. But let's not look down upon them. They don't need our pity. They bloody need us to open up the environment, open up the economy for them. Because we have liberalization for the richest, no liberalization for the poorest. We often say education is necessary for reducing poverty. Well, as it turns out, high income will lead to a rise in education. It's typically been the experience of a lot of countries that have grown all the way till the 1900s. Okay? The top 10. 2011 EFN. Well, look at the countries in the top 10 list. All whose per capita income, prosperity levels are through the roof, compared to India at least, right? So yes, every one of them I'm sure has issues. I'm not saying there are no issues. All I'm saying is that there is a story here that we need to pay attention to. India's performance on the Economic Freedom Index, well, not so good. 1990, our watershed moment, right? Since then, we have done much better. And yes, we have gone up the ranks up and down. And I suspect that next year we will climb up again, given all of the recent reform measures that have taken place. But after 90, we didn't really do any landmark things. Have you guys heard of the Doing Business report by the World Bank? The Ease of Doing Business? It's a very, very interesting report that the World Bank puts out every year, and the idea is that let's find out how easy it is to start and run a business in a particular country, not an industrial business, any business, right? So they classify, they take a sample from across the spectrum of businesses, and then they try and quantify and give it a rating. Look at the number of licenses, look at the time that it takes to get a permit, look at the cost of the permit, sort of all of those parameters. India is 132 out of 183. And the weightage in the doing business is typically for smaller businesses. So not even for industrial, sort of the segment, which is very interesting. We're not doing so well. We're not a shining example of anything. So yes, what do we need to do in the immediate future? So if you look at questions of governance, right? I want to tackle this since you've brought it up. Questions of governance in today's big issue of corruption. Why does corruption exist? Why do you bribe your RTO? You bribe him to get a license because otherwise you won't get your license. If you had 4 private, this is me in my anarcho-capitalist best, if you will. If you had 4 private standards providers for driving, imagine a world. Good. You know this ISI mark that we talk about? Well, the origin of it is in the private sector. Standards of performance, quality, etc. came up in the private sector. ISO, classic example. So you have lots of those, and private regulation and self-regulation is not unknown. But that being said, you do it because the government is focusing, one, on creating licensing on all the wrong things. So therefore, on the good things, they don't have the time to spend to do it well and do it right, and for us to be able to demand it. So for example, RTO, this shouldn't be complicated. Right? But in every sphere of life, that culture, who was talking about culture? That culture of corruption, that culture of looking down upon those who are poorer, the culture of power, wreaking. Every one of this has come up because through our independence, 60 years, all that happened in this country was that the rich were able to get away because they had the connections, they were able to pay the bribes for getting those licenses. And as a culture, think of Jugaad Nation. Why are we a Jugaad Nation? We're a Jugaad Nation because we had to find a way to get around all of the regulations. And today, unfortunately, that's in our DNA. So it's going to take another 20 years of growth. So small examples, look at how our plumbers work, look at how our electricians work. I have a very personal relationship with these kinds of issues. But they always try to get around the problem. It's in our culture now. So that has bred, unfortunately, an unhealthy way of doing business. It'll change, but it'll only change if we liberate and allow for economic freedom, because that brings about improvement in quality of product and services. So my silver bullet is inclusive growth needs inclusive reforms. We opened it up for the rich, we didn't open it up for the poor. We can't expect the poor to be doing better. So yes, that's my very clever little illustration. But all right, thank you very much for listening patiently.
tGELF, leading the change.